one day I will have a dedicated background for videos. Today is not that day, and tomorrow doesn't look promising either. Hello, my loves, how are you? And a very warm welcome back to The Library is Open, so I hope you've brought your library cards, my darlings. How are we doing? I've been off the tube, as it were, for a couple of weeks because, and this also plays into the reason that I'm currently looking like a camp member of the Sith, because I'm recently back from the States, the East Coast, Chicago to be precise, and let me tell you, I knew intellectually that the jet lag was a thing, but it's that sort of thing, you know, that we have as people where we're like, oh, that won't happen to me, I'll be fine. But honestly, I'm still feeling quite spacey, and sort of a bit all over the place. Hence, you know, for some reason having my hood up just makes me feel comfy and sort of, you know what I mean? So my one concession is that I've worn a t-shirt under this, so it looks like I've dressed up. But in actual fact, it's comfies all the way, kids. So yeah, you will get a proper vlog about my experiences in Chicago, which was amazing, suffice it to say. That was my first time in the States, so, you know, it was pretty magic. And I think you'll get two, actually. You'll get an actual vlog of my kind of time in Chicago, and you'll also get a like a sort of book haul from Chicago, which was like, I'm not going to feel guilty about that because that was one of my intentions, but I wanted to film this first because I've been meaning to do it for a while, and I kind of wanted to do it in January, but it didn't happen because of the Veganuary and everything, but better late than never, right? So here we are. I want to talk a little bit today more in depth about Ed Winters, aka Earthling Ed, and their book, This is Vegan Propaganda and Other Lies the Meat Industry Tells You. Now, this was on one of my most anticipated book lists for the start of this year, and it came out last month. And I have to say, you know, there have been a kind of plethora of vegan books, and rightly so, coming out in the last couple of years as the kind of movement, let's call it a movement, has grown. And I haven't really been tempted to pick up many of them before. The one exception would probably be Fat Gay Vegan, who, that was good. But I think that was because it was also more of a kind of a memoir of sorts about a journey. Now, I have to be honest, because I'm not hugely into cookery, you know, those vegan guys slay the cookery. Library is Open, not so much. You know, it's not a passion for food or anything like that. My veganism is quite boring, but ultimately I think well-intentioned. So, you know, I haven't really picked up any of the other sort of vegan books before, mostly because they were recipes and stuff, which is like, they're beautiful to look at, but it's not necessarily something that I would read. I know some people read recipe books and stuff in bed for like relaxation, but I prefer a cozy crime. But I thought, no, you know what? Because Earthling Ed obviously is quite a big personality, and, you know, this didn't appear to be a book about the how per se, but more about the why. I was more interested in that. And, you know, having completed it now, I absolutely stand by that, and I'm really glad I read it. So I was going to say there's no spoilers for this, but I don't know if you can spoil something that is based on factual evidence. So I'm just going to try and give you an overview. Now, you know, it's fair to say that I am aware, or was aware, of Earthling Ed before, but I wasn't a kind of avid consumer of their content. Now, I don't know why that is. I was thinking about this the other day. It's like I don't consume a lot of vegan content, not because I'm not interested, but or supportive of that, obviously, because I am vegan. But, you know, I get, maybe it comes back to the recipe thing again. Maybe it's something like that. Although I know that Earthling Ed doesn't do that. It's more political and social change based, their work. But I wasn't overly familiar with that. But from what I understand, and have seen of Earthling Ed, I suppose I went into the book with certain expectations about, you know, I think he's a very calm personality, almost supernaturally calm in some respects. That's not a criticism. You know, and able to debate without becoming overly emotive, which is probably a very wise thing. It's something I struggle with, I think, as a person, to debate things that I feel passionately about. So I wondered if it was going to be the same in the book. And the short answer is kind of no, but also yes. I'll explain. So this is not so much a memoir of sorts, although it does have elements of memoir in it, where Ed sort of talks about his own journey into veganism and speaks very frankly in many ways about, you know, his past kind of cognitive dissonances around eating animals. And that's a really nice bit of the book. It's mostly an introduction, that, although he does come back to it later, where he sort of discusses, you know, here's where my mind was at this point, here's how my mind changed based on this incident, and so on and so forth. He does a really nice job, actually, of linking the kind of phenomena, if you will, around domestic or companion animals that we have, and that kind of dissonance that exists between eating animals and loving animals. You know, that whole thing that is quite difficult to negotiate with people, because they're not always willing to hear or see that. But then he kind of deep dives into what I absolutely love, because, you know, any kind of chapter in this book or any kind of subsection would be a great argument, or rather evidentiary support that will kind of bat away those things that you see on the internet constantly. You know, you'll see things from people who do consume animals or animal products, where they'll sort of try to present factual studies and science-based things. And what he does in the book is kind of look at those arguments and then look at, here's the actual fact. And he really encourages people to, which I adore, is to really trace the root of all those studies and things, which is, we try to do this a lot at the university as well, at work, where we're like, you know, if we're looking at evidence-based things, you can't just say this study exists. What you have to do is go back, see, you know, who paid for the study, who benefits from the results of this study. You know, so a lot of times arguments that people will make in favour of consuming animal products or animals are funded by things like, you know, the dairy industry or the farmers union. That's not the name of it, but you get the idea. So it's like there's a kind of a chain of evidence, if you will. So yeah, I think it's always important. So the book's broadly kind of drawn into 3 sections. The first is kind of about the morality of veganism. It's literally called A Question of Morality, where he kind of discusses, you know, animal cruelty more generally, and kind of debunks a lot of stuff around particularly food packaging and things like that, and initiatives that are allegedly set up to support and, you know, foster good practice and treatment of animals. It's really, really interesting to look at now, particularly with the what's been in the news lately about the footballer who kicked the cat. I'm not sure of his name, I'm afraid, but he, you know, I had a really interesting conversation with a friend the other night about the fact that, because he'd been fined for that, hasn't he? But he's gone back to work, and my friend was like, should he have gone back to work or whatever? And, you know, is that the same as harming a human? And in my head, it absolutely is. And that's one of the biggest cognitive dissonances, isn't it? And one of the biggest examples of speciesism, which is, like, if you kick a cat or if you injure an animal, it's somehow less, but it's only less if you assume that other species are less than or subservient to humans, and I don't think that. So I think if you kick a cat, we should consider that GBH. You know, but it's just interesting. So yeah, he kind of goes through the kind of biggies as well. So like milk, chicken, cow and pig, you know, as the kind of most recognizable sort of, I guess, things that we see, wider consumers see as products and things, and sort of deep dives into them. Then the second part, he looks at more environmental issues, and this was where it was really fascinating, because I always sort of had half-baked arguments in my head. They're not, I don't mean half-baked as in they weren't accurate, but as in my understanding is was lacking, and still is. I'm no expert, you know. I've always approached veganism as a kind of issue of ethics and morality, And it's one of those things that I just know is right, but, you know, and then people, and I instinctively know when people are lying about things like, oh, this is bad for the environment, you know, so I know the basics and stuff, the fact that, like, when people will say soy production is really bad for the environment, and, you know, I can kind of back with, well, yes, but the majority of soy is grown to feed, you know, the animal agriculture industry. But this really goes a lot further and talks a lot about, you know, greenhouse gases and carbon in the atmosphere and stuff like that. Some really, really interesting facts and figures and scientific studies from independent bodies as well, who are seemingly unbiased. Although, of course, we have to interrogate them as well, but their evidence is much more compelling than if it's from a corporation. And, you know, I've been brooding a lot. Brooding is the wrong word, perhaps, but I've been musing a lot on that in the light of the kind of clean air initiatives that are coming in the UK at the moment. And just sort of, I think I wrote about it on Twitter as well and on Instagram about how, you know, if we want to talk about protecting and rescuing the planet and we're not making the effects of animal agriculture a main target, then we're either not serious or critically aware, or both. You know, it's all very well to sort of talk about road traffic, but if we're not really looking at the effects of you know, large scale animal agriculture, then it's a we in the ocean, isn't it, to coin a phrase. So there's that. So some really interesting stuff about carbon and about how, you know, oftentimes people will say things like cows grazing is really good for reducing carbon because they put it back into the earth and stuff. But the thing is, I discovered from this book that is finite, as in the earth can't take just endless amounts of carbon. Eventually it will die. And there's a really interesting thing about deforestation, which we kind of recognise from, you know, more vividly, I guess, abroad. I'm saying this from a UK perspective, but, you know, Ed sort of talks about a lot of the fact that arable land that was used for farming in the UK, and I presume in other countries as well, is actually dead, even though it looks green, just because it's been used constantly. So, you know, that's really, really fascinating and not something I necessarily thought of. The third point is mostly about psychology, and this is really where the kind of cognitive dissonance stuff comes in, and he sort of interrogates you know, how we've come to be fed tradition, if you'll pardon the phrase, fed tradition and kind of, you know, an understanding that this is just normal or this is the way things are. And you know, how do you create a culture whereby this just feels like completely natural? And he sort of goes through all that. And, you know, there's a brilliant video, I don't know if you've ever seen it, about food marketing. I'll try and link it below in the description, about this this woman she's an actor, but she's posing as somebody from the food industry. And she talks a lot about the secret weapon for food marketing, which is, you know, to tell half-truths about how the animals are treated, and also to rely on willful ignorance of a consumer. You know, she talks about systematic cruelty of the meat and dairy industries. So it's really, really interesting, and it kind of spoke to this. And also this section also interrogates how you can talk about veganism, and, you know, how it just generally it makes for a better world for everyone and a better experience of life. There's a lot of stuff I've missed out here. He touches a lot on disease and illness treatment and so on and so forth, and also he talks about, you know, specific conditions that are either exacerbated by eating animals or, you know, assisted by a plant-based diet, which is, you know, again, a great case study to point to, you know, particularly when a lot of people will tell you that they can't be plant-based because of medical conditions, which is, I have to be honest, I have a very difficult time with, as a rule, as a kind of washover catch-all situation. I'm not saying that some people can't, I'm not saying that at all. I appreciate that, geography and so on and so forth plays a part, but I do think that a kind of blanket statement saying it's simply impossible for people is flawed as an argument. So yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, I read this really quickly, and what I really enjoyed was, although there are elements of you know, Ed's kind of emotional connection to the material, it's actually very scientific and systematic, and there's, you know, there's nowhere in the book that you could point and sort of say, oh, you know, this is just somebody very upset and making things up and trying to guilt trip you, because it's all, it's, you know, it's very thoroughly referenced and notated, and, you know, there's chapter and verse on absolutely everything. I'm just skimming the surface with like how good this is as a comprehensive resource, and what I think he cleverly does, particularly with the title, is look at how people will say this is vegan propaganda, but actually in unpicking all the things, unpicking all the arguments that people have against veganism, what he's actually showing is that this is, you know, meat and dairy propaganda. So they're very interesting. Absolutely would recommend, irrespective of whether or not you're vegan, you know, keep an open mind and have a read of this, and, you know, get back to me on what your conclusions are. And this is really good even if you are vegan as well, as I say, because I already am, but, you know, just in terms of really interrogating what that means, not just on an emotional level, but also on a scientific, animal, environmental, health level, just to have that information at your fingertips when, you know, whenever the trolls kind of come for you. So it's, yeah, really great book. Really happy I read this, actually. You can get a signed one, which I didn't, which is very upsetting, but hey ho. So have you picked this up? If you have, let me know. If you haven't, will you? Let me know what you thought. I'd love to have a conversation about it. I feel that I want to go back actually and reread sections of it and just sort of see, you know, really kind of solidify all the arguments, because it's so easily written that it's so readable that I'm just like, just keep going rather than dwelling on some of the things that maybe I would like to interrogate a bit further. So there we go. Ed Winters, This is Vegan Propaganda and Other Lies the Meat Industry Tells You. 5 out of 5. 5-star. Loved it. But thank you for joining me for that little deep dive into that book. I will be back very soon with my Chicago vlogs plural. And of course, book club is coming up too on first weekend in March. All the details are in the description as before. If you've never joined us before, do. This is the kind of deep diving we do into the text, but it just takes longer and we all have a cup of tea. So thank you for joining me. Put your library card somewhere safe, and do take absolutely the best possible care of yourself and those around you. Keep sniffing those books, and much love. Mwah.